Marcus Chen stood in the cramped cockpit of his salvage ship, staring at the twisted metal hulk floating in the void. The abandoned space station looked like a discarded toy, its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts and solar radiation. Perfect for what he had in mind. The seller had been desperate to get rid of it. Some corporate mining operation that went belly up during the Centauri Wars, leaving behind worthless infrastructure in a dead system. No valuable asteroids, no trade routes, no reason for anyone to come here. Exactly what Marcus wanted. He'd spent his life savings on this chunk of junk plus the fuel to get here. The doctors had given him 6 months, maybe 8 if he was lucky. The cancer was spreading faster than their treatments could keep up. He was tired of fighting, tired of the sympathy in people's eyes, tired of pretending he was okay when every breath felt like swallowing glass. The docking clamps engaged with a satisfying thunk. Marcus powered down his ship's engines for the last time. He wouldn't be needing them again. The station's artificial gravity still worked, though barely. Marcus stumbled as he stepped through the airlock, his legs weak from the journey. The corridor stretched ahead of him, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows on the walls. Someone had left in a hurry. Personal belongings were scattered on the floor, and several doors hung open, revealing empty quarters. Marcus made his way to what had once been the command center. Banks of dead monitors surrounded a central chair, and through the massive viewport he could see the pale light of the system's dying star. It would outlive him by billions of years, which seemed appropriate somehow. He'd brought enough food and water for a few weeks. Pain medication for when things got bad. A bottle of good whiskey his grandfather had left him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to see him through to the end on his own terms. The first few days passed quietly. Marcus explored the station, learning its layout, reading through the abandoned logs. The miners had been optimistic at first, convinced they'd strike it rich. But the asteroids in this system were mostly iron and rock. Nothing valuable enough to justify the expense of shipping it back to civilization. He found a comfortable spot in the observation deck and set up his meager camp. The view of space was magnificent here, unmarred by atmosphere or light pollution. He could see nebulae in the distance, their colors shifting slowly as stellar winds pushed against cosmic dust. On the 4th day, the pain started getting worse. Marcus dry swallowed another pill and tried to focus on a book he'd brought, but the words kept blurring together. Maybe it was time to break out the whiskey. That's when he heard the sound. It was faint at first, like metal scraping against metal. Marcus froze, listening intently. The station systems were old and failing, probably just thermal expansion causing the hull to creak. But then it came again, louder this time and definitely not random. Someone was knocking on the outer airlock. Marcus forced himself to his feet, his heart pounding. It couldn't be human. No ship had followed him here, and he'd made sure of that. The nearest inhabited system was 3 weeks away by conventional drive. Maybe it was debris, or some automated probe that had wandered off course. The knocking came again, rhythmic and deliberate. 3 short taps, pause, 3 more taps. Definitely intentional. Marcus made his way to the airlock controls, his hands shaking. The external cameras were dead, but the proximity sensors were still functional. Something large was pressed against the hull, too big to be a person in a spacesuit. The mass readings made no sense. Against every instinct screaming at him to leave it alone, Marcus initiated the docking sequence. The outer door cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Whatever was out there, it was breathing oxygen. Heavy footsteps echoed through the station's corridors, heading in his direction. Marcus backed away from the airlock, grabbing a plasma cutter from a nearby maintenance kit. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The footsteps stopped just around the corner. Marcus held his breath, waiting. Then she appeared. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted from deep blue to silver in the emergency lighting. Her head was distinctly draconic, with intelligent golden eyes and a crown of small horns. Wings folded against her back, and her tail swished nervously behind her. In her clawed hands she carried something small and glowing. Marcus stared in shock. Dragons were supposed to be mythical, creatures from human fairy tales. They certainly weren't supposed to exist in space, and they definitely weren't supposed to be knocking on his door. The dragon looked directly at him and spoke in accented but clear English. "You are the human who came here to die, yes?"
I am Viroleth.
"I have been watching your species for some time. You fascinate me." Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times before managing to croak, "How do you know English? Your people are not as isolated as you believe," Virolith replied, taking a careful step closer. "We have observed you from the shadows for generations. Your resilience, your stubborn refusal to give up even when faced with impossible odds. It is admirable." She held up the glowing object in her hands. It was roughly the size of a human heart, pulsing with soft blue light. "This is why I have come. A gift, one might say. Your species has earned it through deeds both great and terrible." Marcus lowered the plasma cutter, realizing how ridiculous he must look threatening an 8-foot dragon with a glorified welding tool. "What kind of gift?" Viroleth's expression grew serious. "The kind that will ensure your people survive what is coming. The kind that will let you take your place among the true powers of this galaxy." She paused, studying his face. "But first, human Marcus Chen, you must choose to live." Marcus laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the empty corridor. "Choose to live? Lady, I've got cancer eating me alive from the inside out. The choice was taken away from me months ago." Virolith tilted her massive head, studying him with those unsettling golden eyes. "Your physicians told you this, yes? That your body is failing? That death is inevitable? They gave me 6 months. Maybe 8 if I'm lucky." Marcus set down the plasma cutter and leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "I came here to die on my own terms, not hooked up to machines in some sterile hospital room." "Human medicine is primitive," Virolith said simply. "Effective for minor ailments, but lacking understanding of deeper biological processes. Your species treats symptoms, not causes." She moved closer, her claws clicking against the metal deck plates. Despite her size and obvious predatory nature, her movements were graceful, almost careful, as if she was trying not to frighten him further. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward him with one clawed hand. Marcus hesitated. Everything about this situation was insane. He was talking to a dragon in space, discussing his terminal illness like it was a minor inconvenience. But what did he have to lose? "Go ahead." Viroleth's hand hovered just above his chest, not quite touching. Her eyes closed, and the small horns on her head began to glow with the same blue light as the object she carried. Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation, like electricity flowing through his bones. After a moment, her eyes opened. "Interesting. Your cellular structure is more resilient than I expected. The damage is extensive but not irreversible. Your kind has remarkable healing potential when properly guided." "You're saying you can cure cancer?" Marcus tried to keep the hope out of his voice but failed. "I am saying that your gift includes more than you might expect." Virolith held up the glowing object again. "This is a symbiotic organism, one of the last of its kind. It has been waiting for the right host for over 3,000 years. Marcus backed away. "A parasite? No thanks. I'd rather die of cancer than have some alien thing eating my brain." "Not a parasite," Virolith corrected gently. "A partner. It will heal your body, extend your life, enhance your capabilities. In return, it will learn from your experiences, your emotions, your very human way of seeing the universe." She moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. "My people have watched yours for many generations. We have seen you fight wars that should have destroyed you, survive catastrophes that would have broken other species, adapt to environments that should have been impossible to conquer. You do not surrender even when surrender would be logical." "That's just stubbornness," Marcus said. "Perhaps, but it is the kind of stubbornness that changes the galaxy." Virolith turned back to him. "There are threats coming, Marcus Chen. Ancient enemies that see the younger races as nothing more than resources to be harvested. They have destroyed civilizations far older and more advanced than yours." The glowing organism pulsed brighter in her hands. "But they have never faced anything quite like humanity. Your unpredictability, your refusal to accept defeat, your tendency to find solutions where none should exist. These are weapons more powerful than any technology." Marcus stared at the creature in her hands. It looked almost alive, shifting and flowing like liquid light contained in organic crystal. "Why me? If this thing is so important, why give it to a dying man in the middle of nowhere?" "Because dying men have nothing left to lose," Virolith replied. "And sometimes that makes them capable of extraordinary things." She extended her hands toward him, offering the symbiont. "This choice will change everything. Not just for you, but potentially for your entire species. The symbiont will bond with your genetic structure, becoming part of you. You will live far longer than any human before you. You will be stronger, faster, more resilient. Your mind will be enhanced, capable of processing information at speeds that would overwhelm an unaugmented brain. And the catch? There is no catch, only responsibility. You will become something new, something between human and something greater. You will be a bridge between your people and the wider galaxy. When the ancient enemies come, you will need to be ready. Marcus looked out at the stars, thinking of Earth somewhere in that vast darkness. He thought of his sister Sarah, probably planning his funeral right now. Of his nephew Tommy, who'd wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up. Of all the people who would never know that monsters were lurking in the dark between the stars. If I do this, he said slowly, if I take your gift, what happens then? Then you learn, Viroleth replied. You discover what it truly means to be human, when you no longer have the limitations of a purely human body. You prepare for what is coming, and when the time comes, you help your people do what they do best. Which is? For the first time since she'd appeared, Viroleth smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Survive against impossible odds and make your enemies regret underestimating you. Marcus stared at the symbiont for a long moment. The smart thing would be to refuse, to stick with his original plan. Die quietly and let someone else deal with whatever cosmic horrors might be heading Earth's way, but he'd never been particularly smart. All right, he said, reaching for the glowing organism. Let's see what happens when a stubborn human gets a second chance. The moment his fingers touched the symbiont, the universe exploded into light and sensation. Every nerve in his body fired at once as the creature flowed into his skin, merging with his cellular structure on a molecular level. He felt his cancer cells being systematically destroyed and replaced, his organs strengthening, his mind expanding to accommodate new neural pathways. He was changing, becoming something that had never existed before, still human but so much more. The last thing he heard before consciousness faded was Viroleth's voice, warm with approval. Welcome to the greater galaxy, Marcus Chen. Try not to disappoint us. Marcus woke to the sensation of electricity flowing through his veins. Every muscle in his body felt supercharged, like he'd been plugged into a power source and left to overcharge. He sat up carefully, expecting the usual wave of nausea and weakness that had plagued him for months. Instead, he felt incredible. The pain in his chest was gone completely. His vision was sharper than it had ever been, so clear he could make out individual scratches on the far wall that should have been invisible in the dim lighting. When he flexed his fingers, he could feel strength there that hadn't existed before, controlled power that seemed to respond to his thoughts. Viroleth sat nearby, watching him with interest. How do you feel? Different, Marcus said, climbing to his feet with an ease that startled him. Very different. How long was I unconscious? 18 hours. The bonding process varies by individual. Some take days, others mere minutes. You were somewhere in the middle. She stood as well, her impressive height no longer seeming quite so intimidating. The symbiont has integrated successfully. Your cellular structure has been completely rebuilt. Marcus looked down at his hands. They looked the same, but when he concentrated, he could see tiny flecks of blue light moving just beneath his skin, like microscopic stars flowing through his bloodstream. Is this permanent? Irreversibly so. You are no longer entirely human, though you remain more human than anything else. The symbiont preserves your essential nature while enhancing your capabilities. Viroleth moved to a wall panel and activated what appeared to be a holographic display, but enhancement alone is not enough. You need education. The hologram showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with various regions marked in different colors. Most of it was unfamiliar to Marcus, but he could make out the local arm where human space was located. A tiny cluster of stars barely visible on the galactic scale. Your species has been expanding for less than 2 centuries, Viroleth explained. In galactic terms, you have barely taken your first steps beyond your homeworld, but your expansion has been noticed by others. She gestured, and the map zoomed in on a region of space that appeared completely empty. The Devourers have been dormant for nearly 10,000 years. They are ancient beyond measure, older than any current civilization. They consume entire star systems, stripping them of resources and leaving nothing but cold, dead space behind. Sounds like a standard galactic threat, Marcus said. Why is humanity special? There have to be species out there with better technology, bigger fleets, more experience fighting these things. There are. Viroleth's expression grew grim. The Althari Empire had fleets numbering in the millions and weapons that could crack planets. The Devourers consumed them in less than a year. The crystalline hegemony had technology so advanced they existed partially outside normal spacetime. They lasted 3 months. She manipulated the hologram, showing the empty regions where these great civilizations had once existed. Every species that has faced the Devourers has approached the problem logically. They analyzed their enemies' capabilities, developed counters for their technology, deployed their forces according to established military doctrine. And that didn't work? The Devourers have been fighting for millions of years. They have seen every logical response, defeated every reasonable strategy. What they have not encountered is unreasonable opposition. Marcus began to understand. You think humans will do something unexpected? I know you will. Your species has a disturbing tendency to ignore impossible odds and find solutions that should not exist. Virolith called up historical records, showing human conflicts throughout history. When outnumbered, you do not surrender, you adapt. When outgunned, you do not retreat, you innovate. When faced with certain defeat, you do not despair, you become more stubborn. The records showed human battles from throughout history, ancient warriors charging against superior numbers, pilots flying damaged fighters into impossible odds, colonists surviving on worlds that should have killed them within days. But this is different, Marcus protested. This is a galactic-scale threat. Individual human stubbornness isn't going to stop planet-consuming aliens. Individual human stubbornness, amplified by symbiotic enhancement and multiplied across your entire species, might. Virolith turned to face him directly. The symbiont you now carry is one of 12 that we have preserved. Each is unique, each will bond differently with its host. Together they will create a new form of human, one capable of feats that pure-strain humans could never accomplish. Marcus felt something stir in his mind, a presence that was definitely not his own thoughts. The symbiont was awakening, beginning to communicate in ways that bypassed language entirely. Images flowed through his consciousness, vast fleets moving between stars, worlds being systematically stripped of life, the cold emptiness left behind by the Devourers. But there were other images too. Humans fighting back with weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics, fleets appearing from nowhere to strike at vulnerable points, tactics so bizarre they bordered on insanity but somehow worked. The symbiont is showing me possibilities, Marcus said slowly. Things that haven't happened yet. Potential futures, Virolith confirmed. The symbiont exists partially outside linear time. It can perceive probability streams, possible outcomes based on current choices, but the future is not fixed. What it shows you are merely the most likely paths. Marcus watched as the visions continued to flow through his mind. In some, humanity was overwhelmed and consumed. In others, they fought the Devourers to a standstill, but at a cost that left the galaxy a lifeless wasteland. But in a few the most improbable scenarios, humanity not only survived but thrived, spreading their unique brand of controlled chaos throughout the galaxy. Why dragons? He asked suddenly. Why are your people helping us? Virolith was quiet for a long moment. Because we remember what it was like to be young and defiant, she said finally. My people were once like yours, quick to fight, slow to give up, convinced that any problem could be solved with enough determination. We grew wise over the millennia, learned to think before acting, to consider consequences before making decisions. That sounds like a good thing. Wisdom is valuable, she agreed, but sometimes wisdom leads to paralysis. We have become so careful, so afraid of making mistakes, that we rarely take action at all. We saw the Devourers stirring and spent 3 centuries debating the best response. By the time we decided to act, it was nearly too late. She gestured toward the hologram, which now showed the current positions of various species throughout the galaxy. Your people have been spacefaring for less time than we spent in committee meetings. Yet you have already accomplished things that we would have considered impossible. You have survived in environments that should have killed you, made allies of species that should have been your enemies, found solutions to problems that had no logical answers. So you're betting on the crazy humans to do something appropriately insane. Essentially, yes. Virolith actually smiled at that. And now with the symbiont's enhancement, you have the tools to make that insanity effective on a galactic scale. Marcus could feel the symbiont's presence growing stronger in his mind, integrating more fully with his thoughts and memories. It was learning from him, understanding what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. What do I do now? he asked. Now, Virolith said, you learn to be the bridge between human and post-human. You master your new capabilities, and you prepare to do what humans do best when faced with impossible odds, which is, prove that the odds were wrong. Training with Virolith was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The dragon seemed to know exactly how to push him to his limits without breaking him, and those limits were expanding daily as the symbiont continued to integrate with his system. Focus, Virolith instructed as Marcus attempted to manipulate one of the station's damaged control panels. The symbiont can interface directly with most forms of technology, but it requires conscious direction from your human intuition. Marcus pressed his palm against the panel, feeling the strange sensation of the symbiotic organisms flowing through his nervous system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly the panel came alive with light and the sound of systems powering up throughout the section. I can feel the entire station, Marcus said, wonder in his voice. Every system, every damaged component, every power relay. It's like having a complete schematic in my head. The symbiont learns and adapts, Virolith explained. It has been analyzing the station's technology since we arrived. Human engineering is different from what it has encountered before. More intuitive, less elegant, but remarkably robust. Over the following weeks, Marcus discovered the full extent of his new capabilities. His strength had increased dramatically, enough that he could bend metal with his bare hands. His reflexes were superhuman, allowing him to catch objects moving faster than his old eyes could have tracked. But the mental enhancements were even more remarkable. The symbiont had given him access to its vast memory banks, containing the accumulated knowledge of dozens of dead civilizations. He could read technical specifications in languages that didn't exist anymore, understand scientific principles that human science hadn't even discovered yet. But what impressed Virolith most was how he used this knowledge. Keltar engineer would have spent months designing the perfect solution, she observed as Marcus jury-rigged a power coupling using components that weren't designed to work together. An Althari scientist would have run probability calculations to ensure optimal performance. Humans don't have months when something needs fixing, Marcus replied, tightening connections with enhanced strength while simultaneously monitoring power flow through the symbiont's sensory network. We make it work with what we have, worry about optimization later. The repair held, providing stable power to sections of the station that had been dark for decades. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective, and the symbiont found this approach fascinating. Through their neural link, Marcus could sense the organism's growing understanding of human nature. It had expected logic, careful planning, methodical approaches to problems. Instead, it was learning about intuitive leaps, creative improvisation, and the peculiarly human ability to make desperate gambles work through sheer determination. Your symbiont is evolving, Virolith told him one day as they watched him repair a complex atmospheric processor using nothing but spare parts and what she called aggressive optimism. It is becoming something new, neither fully itself nor fully human, but a synthesis of both. Is that good or bad? It is unprecedented. The other symbionts we have preserved were bonded with members of more logical species. They learned calculation, patience, careful consideration of consequences. Yours is learning to embrace chaos as a tool. Marcus paused in his work, a disturbing thought occurring to him. You said there were 12 symbionts. Where are the others going? To individuals we have identified as having the greatest potential to lead humanity in the coming conflict. Military leaders, scientists, politicians, explorers, each will receive different enhancements based on their role. But I'm nobody, Marcus protested. I was a salvage operator dying of cancer. Why waste one of your precious symbionts on me? Virolith studied him with those ancient golden eyes. Because sometimes the most important role is simply to survive and remember. Wars are won by generals and scientists, but the meaning of victory is preserved by those who understand what was fought for. She gestured toward the viewport, where distant stars twinkled in the void. When the Devourers come, they will target your leaders first. They will attempt to decapitate your military command, eliminate your greatest minds, disrupt your political structures. Your enhanced generals and scientists may not survive the first wave of attack, but a nobody hiding on a forgotten space station might. Precisely. You will be humanity's backup plan, the keeper of knowledge and capabilities that might otherwise be lost. If the worst happens, you will be the one to carry on, to ensure that human stubbornness survives even when humans themselves are endangered. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders. He'd come here to die quietly and instead found himself tasked with potentially being the last guardian of human civilization. There's something else, Viruleth continued. The symbiont has begun showing you visions of possible futures. What have you seen? Marcus closed his eyes, accessing the stream of probability images that flowed constantly through his enhanced consciousness. Most of them were fragments, brief glimpses of events that might occur. But some were clearer, more detailed. I see the Devourers arriving in human space, he said slowly. Massive ships bigger than anything we've ever built. They don't attack immediately. They study first, learning our weaknesses, mapping our defenses. That matches their historical patterns. They are methodical in their approach to consumption. What else? Humans doing impossible things. Ships that shouldn't exist. Weapons that work on principles our science says are wrong. Tactics that make no logical sense but somehow achieve victory. Marcus opened his eyes. But I also see failure. Entire worlds consumed, fleets destroyed, billions dead. The future is mutable, Viruleth reminded him. What the symbiont shows you are possibilities, not certainties. The outcome will depend on the choices made by individuals like you. That night, as Viruleth rested in her own strange way, Marcus stood alone in the observation deck, watching the stars and thinking about the burden he'd accepted. The symbiont pulsed gently in his mind, sharing its own thoughts and concerns. It was afraid, he realized. Not of death, but of failure. For 3,000 years it had waited for the right host, the right species, the right moment to make a difference. Now bonded with a stubborn human salvage operator, it was trying to become something that could help save not just one species, but possibly the entire galaxy. No pressure, Marcus murmured to himself. But even as he said it, he could feel something stirring in his enhanced mind. Ideas were forming, connections being made between human ingenuity and symbiotic knowledge. The beginnings of plans that were either brilliant or completely insane. Given that he was human, they were probably both. In the distance so far away it was barely visible even to his enhanced vision. A small cluster of stars pulsed with unnatural light. The symbiont recognized the pattern immediately, Devourer scout ships awakening from their long dormancy. The war was beginning, whether humanity was ready or not. But ready or not, humans had never been ones to back down from a fight they couldn't win. Marcus smiled grimly and began making preparations. If the galaxy wanted to see what human stubbornness looked like when amplified by alien technology, he was more than happy to provide a demonstration. 3 months after bonding with the symbiont, Marcus had transformed the Forgotten Station into something that shouldn't have been possible. Where Viruleth saw improvised repairs and jury-rigged systems, Marcus saw a laboratory for testing the impossible. This violates at least 17 different laws of physics, Viruleth observed, watching Marcus work on his latest project. He'd somehow managed to create a quantum resonance chamber using mining equipment, kitchen appliances, and what appeared to be the station's old espresso machine. Human physics, Marcus corrected, not looking up from his work. The symbiont's memories include knowledge from species that understood the universe differently. Sometimes you have to break the rules to find out what's really possible. The device he was building hummed with contained energy, creating localized distortions in space-time that made the air shimmer. According to everything humanity knew about science, it should have exploded the moment he turned it on. Instead, it was generating what the symbiont's memories identified as a stable dimensional fold. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Viruleth asked, though she suspected she already knew. Testing a theory. Marcus made a final adjustment and stepped back. The Devourers are powerful because they're methodical. They've been fighting the same way for millions of years, and it works. But what if they encounter something that doesn't follow their rules? He activated the device. Space folded in on itself, creating a pocket dimension barely large enough for a person. Marcus reached into it and his arm disappeared, though he could still feel it and move it normally. Dimensional manipulation, Viruleth breathed. That took my people millennia to develop. Yeah, well, I had good notes. Marcus grinned as he withdrew his arm from the fold. And the advantage of not knowing it was supposed to be impossible. The symbiont keeps trying to warn me about the dangers, but I figure if I don't understand the risks, I can't be afraid of them. This was becoming a pattern. While Viroleth shared careful, methodical knowledge about galactic civilizations and their technologies, Marcus combined that information with human intuition and a dangerous willingness to experiment. The results were often crude, sometimes unstable, but undeniably effective. He'd created a gravity manipulation system using the station's rotating sections and some creative rewiring. The power output wasn't much by galactic standards, but he'd built it from scrap metal and mining tools. He'd developed a crude form of faster-than-light communication by jury-rigging the station's old sensors with symbiont-enhanced modifications. The signal only traveled a few light-years, but it bypassed every known form of FTL detection. Each breakthrough was small, barely worth noticing compared to the technologies wielded by advanced galactic civilizations. But they were human breakthroughs, created through an approach that no other species had ever attempted. "You're not building weapons," Viroleth realized one day as she watched Marcus work on yet another impossible contraption. "You're building proof of concept." Bingo. Marcus looked up from what appeared to be a device for converting gravitational waves into usable energy. Every major breakthrough in human history started with some crazy person building something that shouldn't work in their garage. The Wright brothers, the first computers, fusion reactors, FTL drives. Someone had to prove it was possible before anyone else would take it seriously. But the Devourers will be here soon. The other symbiont hosts need practical weapons, not experimental prototypes. "They'll get practical weapons," Marcus assured her, "but they'll get them based on principles that no one has ever seen before. When I transmit these designs to Earth, human engineers will spend about 5 minutes figuring out how they work. Then another 5 minutes figuring out how to make them better." He was right, and Viroleth knew it. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't any individual achievement, but their collective ability to iterate and improve on new ideas at incredible speed. Give them a working prototype, and within months they'd have a dozen improved versions and 3 completely different applications. The symbiont was learning too, absorbing Marcus's approach and sharing it through the quantum entanglement that linked all 12 organisms. The other hosts, scattered across human space, would begin receiving intuitive insights about impossible technologies and unconventional applications of known science. "There's something else," Marcus said, his expression growing serious. "The symbiont has been showing me more detailed visions. I think I know how the Devourers operate." He activated a holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional representation of a Devourer fleet. The ships were massive dark structures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formation, their approach methodical and overwhelming. "They don't just consume resources," Marcus explained. "They consume information. Every engagement they fight, every technology they encounter, every tactic used against them gets absorbed and analyzed. That's why logical opposition fails. They learn from it and develop counters, which is why they've been undefeated for millions of years," Viroleth agreed grimly. "But here's the thing about human illogic," Marcus continued, manipulating the hologram to show potential engagement scenarios. "It's not just random. There's a method to our madness, but it's based on intuition and emotional responses, rather than pure calculation. We don't just break rules, we break them in ways that serve our goals." The simulation showed human fleets engaging Devourer forces using tactics that made no sense. Ships deliberately flying into obvious traps, only to reveal that the trap was actually a counter-trap. Weapons that appeared to malfunction but were actually working exactly as intended. Battle plans that seemed to be falling apart but were actually progressing according to some deeper strategy. "Controlled chaos," Marcus said. "Organized insanity. The Devourers can analyze our technology and learn to counter it, but they can't analyze our decision-making process if even we don't fully understand it." Viroleth studied the simulation with growing amazement. "You're proposing to win through unpredictability itself. I'm proposing to win by being human, really truly human, in ways that no other species can replicate or fully understand." Marcus gestured toward his collection of impossible devices. "These aren't just prototypes. They're proof that human intuition, enhanced by symbiotic knowledge, can produce results that pure logic can't achieve." The implications were staggering. If Marcus was right, then humanity's greatest weakness, their tendency toward seemingly irrational behavior, was actually their greatest strength when properly applied. "The other hosts," Viroleth said slowly, "they need to see this. They need to understand that they're not just receiving enhanced capabilities. They're being prepared to wage war using uniquely human methods. Already working on it, Marcus indicated his communication array. Every breakthrough I make gets transmitted to a relay network I've been building. The signals look like random stellar noise to most scanners, but the other symbionts will recognize them and translate the information for their hosts. He paused, looking out at the distant stars where enemy scouts were already moving. The Devourers think they're facing another logical species that will follow predictable patterns. Instead, they're about to encounter 12 humans with enhanced capabilities and a collective willingness to try things that should be impossible. That's either the most brilliant strategy in galactic history, Virulith observed, or the most elaborate form of suicide ever conceived. Marcus grinned, the expression made slightly unsettling by the blue light now permanently visible in his eyes. With humans, those are often the same thing. In the depths of space, Devourer scout ships detected unusual energy signatures from an abandoned mining station. The readings were filed away for later analysis. Dismissed as the random activity of a dying civilization, they had no way of knowing that they had just been introduced to humanity's secret weapon, the absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The first Devourer probe ship entered human space on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. Marcus felt it the moment it crossed the boundary, the symbiont reacting to ancient enemy signatures with a flood of battle memories from a dozen extinct civilizations. "They're here," he announced, though Virulith had already sensed it through her own methods. The dragon's massive form was tense, every predatory instinct alert as she monitored galactic communications networks. 3 probe ships, approaching from different vectors, she confirmed. Standard Devourer reconnaissance pattern. They'll study your defenses for several weeks before reporting back to the main fleet. Marcus was already moving, activating systems throughout the station with practiced efficiency. The impossible devices he'd built over the past months hummed to life, creating a symphony of energies that shouldn't have been able to coexist in the same space. "Time to see if human stubbornness can surprise billion-year-old predators," he muttered, interfacing directly with his quantum communication array. The signal he sent was unlike anything that had ever traveled through space. Instead of pure information, it carried quantum entanglement patterns that linked directly to the other 11 symbionts. The message was felt rather than heard, understood at a level deeper than conscious thought. Across human space, the other enhanced individuals suddenly knew everything Marcus had learned. General Patricia Williams, commanding the 5th Fleet near Alpha Centauri, felt impossible tactical knowledge flood her mind. Dr. James Liu, working on experimental weapons at Luna Station, gained instant understanding of technologies that violated everything he'd been taught about physics. Captain Sarah Chen, Marcus's own sister leading deep space reconnaissance missions, suddenly knew how to make her ship do things that its designers had never imagined. The response was immediate and utterly human. Instead of careful planning and cautious deployment, the enhanced individuals began implementing impossible technologies with the kind of reckless confidence that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. General Williams looked at the probe ship approaching, her fleet, and smiled grimly. Her symbiont-enhanced mind was already calculating vectors for maneuvers that should have torn her ships apart. "All units prepare for demonstration of new tactics. And remember, the goal isn't to destroy the probe. The goal is to make it report back with information that will drive their analysts completely insane." Her flagship, the UES Defiance, suddenly folded space around itself and appeared directly next to the probe ship, matching its velocity perfectly despite having been moving in the opposite direction moments before. The probe's sensors registered what appeared to be a complete violation of conservation of momentum. Before it could adapt, the human ship performed a maneuver that involved temporarily existing in 2 places at once, firing weapons that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. The probe ship's databases scrambled to catalog the encounter. Every law of physics it understood said the human vessel should have been destroyed by its own actions. Instead, it was not only intact but apparently operating at enhanced efficiency. The probe fired what should have been a devastating disruptor beam, only to watch the energy get absorbed by human shields and somehow converted into additional power for their impossible drives. Similar encounters played out across the boundary of human space. Ships appeared from nowhere, performed maneuvers that violated causality, then vanished using methods that created more questions than answers. Human weapons fired projectiles that somehow arrived before they were launched. Energy beams that curved through dimensions that shouldn't exist, and missile systems that appeared to be guided by pure intuition, rather than any detectable targeting system. Dr. Liu's experimental weapons proved particularly troubling to Devourer sensors. His gravitational manipulators created localized space-time distortions that made regions of space impassable to conventional physics, while his dimensional phase cannons fired projectiles that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, making them impossible to intercept or defend against. But it was Captain Chen who provided the most disturbing demonstration. Her reconnaissance ship, enhanced with Marcus's dimensional folding technology, simply refused to follow the rules of space-time. It appeared to be in multiple locations simultaneously, each one equally real and equally impossible. When the probe ship attempted to scan it, the readings showed a vessel that was simultaneously approaching from 3 different directions, while also retreating at faster than light speeds. Back on the Forgotten Station, Marcus monitored the encounters through his quantum network, grinning at the chaos his fellow humans were creating. "Your probe ships are getting exactly the kind of intelligence they were designed to collect," he told Viroleth. "Detailed sensor readings of human capabilities, tactical analysis of our response patterns, comprehensive data on our technology and weapons. All of it completely useless," Viroleth observed with growing amazement. "The data they're collecting violates everything they know about science and warfare." "Better than that," Marcus replied, watching readouts that showed Devourer probe ships frantically attempting to verify sensor data that couldn't possibly be accurate. "They're getting information that will make their main fleet overconfident. They'll assume their sensors are malfunctioning, that the readings are somehow corrupted. They'll attack expecting to face normal opponents using normal physics, instead of enhanced humans using impossible physics." "Enhanced humans using human physics," Marcus corrected. "Turns out the universe is a lot more flexible than most species realize. You just have to be willing to ignore the parts of science that tell you something can't be done." The probe ships continued their reconnaissance for 3 more weeks, collecting increasingly bizarre data. Human vessels that existed in quantum superposition until observed, weapons that fired backwards through time to hit targets before they were aimed at, defensive systems that worked by convincing incoming attacks that they had already missed. Each encounter was carefully designed to provide accurate information about completely impossible capabilities. The Devourers would return to their fleet with sensor logs proving that humans could violate causality, ignore conservation laws, and weaponize pure uncertainty itself. When the probe ships finally departed human space, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction through his symbiotic link. The first phase of humanity's defense had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes. "Now what?" Viroleth asked. "Now we wait," Marcus replied, already beginning work on his next impossible project. The Devourers will spend months analyzing the data their probes collected, trying to understand how we're doing what we're doing. They'll develop countermeasures for technologies that don't actually exist, prepare strategies for fighting an enemy that operates on principles they've never encountered. And when they arrive with their main fleet, Marcus's grin was decidedly predatory. "Then we show them what happens when you prepare for the wrong war against the wrong species. They'll be ready to fight enhanced humans using impossible physics. Instead, they'll face regular humans who have learned to make the impossible look routine." Through the quantum link, he could feel the other enhanced individuals preparing for the next phase. Weapons that shouldn't exist were being mass-produced by engineers who had been convinced that they were perfectly normal applications of well-understood science. Military tactics based on controlled chaos were being refined by strategists who had learned to think in ways that most species would consider insane. The Devourers were about to encounter humanity's greatest weapon, the collective ability to make the impossible seem inevitable. And the best part was, by the time they realized what was happening, it would be far too late to adapt. The Devourer fleet arrived 6 months later, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation across 12 different systems simultaneously, 5,000 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever constructed, their hulls black as the void between stars. They moved with the cold precision of a species that had been perfecting the art of extinction for millions of years. Marcus watched their approach through sensor networks he'd established throughout human space. feeling the symbiont's ancient fear mingling with his own very human anticipation. This was it. Everything they'd prepared for came down to the next few hours. "They're deploying exactly as predicted," he reported to Virolith, who stood beside him monitoring Dragon communication channels. "Standard Devourer siege formation designed to overwhelm planetary defenses through coordinated bombardment. Based on the false intelligence your probe encounters provided," she agreed. "Their tactical computers have calculated optimal strategies for fighting an enemy that uses impossible physics. They have no contingency plans for fighting normal humans who have simply learned to be more creative." The first phase of the battle began with humanity doing exactly what the Devourers expected. Human fleets moved to intercept the invasion forces. Weapons charged, shields raised, every response following standard military doctrine. To the ancient enemy, it looked like they'd arrived to find humans fighting conventionally after all. The Devourers opened fire with weapons that could crack continents. Energy discharges that had reduced 1,000 civilizations to cosmic dust. Their targeting computers, enhanced by millions of years of experience, calculated perfect firing solutions for maximum destruction. The weapons struck empty space. Not because they missed, but because the human ships they'd been aimed at had never actually been there in the first place. What the Devourers had been fighting were projections, holograms enhanced by dimensional manipulation technology that made them appear completely real to any sensor system. The actual human fleet was operating from folded space, existing in the same location but displaced just enough to avoid any attack that relied on conventional targeting methods. The real attack came from weapons that shouldn't have been able to exist. Human engineers working from Marcus's impossible blueprints had constructed devices that fired pure probability. The projectiles weren't matter or energy, but concentrated possibility that rewrote local reality according to human intentions. Devourer shields, designed to repel any known form of attack, found themselves trying to defend against weapons that redefined what an attack could be. Armor that had withstood the fury of dying stars, discovered that it couldn't protect against projectiles that existed in quantum superposition until they decided to hit something. The ancient enemies. Response was swift and logical. Their ships adapted to the new threat parameters, shields reconfiguring to account for dimensional displacement, weapons adjusting their targeting to compensate for spatial folding. It didn't help. The moment their systems adapted, human tactics shifted to something even more impossible. Ships began operating outside normal spacetime entirely, existing as pure information until they chose to manifest for attack runs. Weapons started firing backwards through cause and effect, hitting targets by manipulating the circumstances that would lead to their destruction. "This is magnificent," Virolith breathed, watching formations of Devourer vessels struggle to fight an enemy that redefined the nature of existence with every engagement. "They're trying to apply logical solutions to inherently illogical problems," Marcus nodded, though his attention was focused on coordinating the battle through his quantum link with the other enhanced individuals. General Williams was commanding fleets that operated like schools of fish, moving in patterns that felt natural to human intuition, but appeared completely random to analytical minds. Dr. Liu's probability weapons were creating cascading effects throughout enemy formations, making their own systems work against them in ways that violated basic causality. But it was the regular human forces that were proving most devastating. Without enhancement, without impossible technologies, they were simply fighting the way humans had always fought, with stubborn determination and creative interpretation of the rules. Captain Sarah, Chen led a squadron of conventional fighters in an attack run that should have been suicide. Instead of trying to punch through Devourer point defenses, her pilots simply flew patterns that convinced enemy targeting systems that they weren't actually there. When the massive ships opened fire on empty space, the fighters attacked from positions that had been impossible moments before but were perfectly logical now. Across the battle zone, human forces demonstrated their species' greatest talent, making the impossible look routine. They treated violations of physics like minor inconveniences, adapted to circumstances that should have been hopeless, and consistently achieved outcomes that no rational analysis could have predicted. The Devourers, for the first time in millions of years, found themselves confused. Their databases contained no reference for opponents who could ignore fundamental laws while appearing to follow them perfectly. Every tactical algorithm failed, because human behavior couldn't be modeled by systems designed for logical analysis. "They're trying to retreat," Marcus observed, watching as devourer formations began pulling back from multiple engagement zones. "This isn't going according to their plans." "It never could," Viroleth replied. "Their entire approach is based on the assumption that warfare follows predictable patterns. They've encountered the one species in the galaxy that considers predictability a weakness rather than a strength." The devourer fleet regrouped at the edge of human space, their ancient minds struggling to process what they'd experienced. For the first time in their species' memory, they had encountered an enemy that couldn't be understood, analyzed, or countered. Marcus felt the moment when their resolve finally broke. It came through the symbiont's connection to the galaxy's deeper currents, a sensation of vast and ancient certainty crumbling in the face of human stubbornness. The devourers turned and fled, their perfect formations dissolving into chaotic retreat, as ships desperately attempted to escape an enemy that had somehow managed to weaponize impossibility itself. "It's over," Marcus announced, feeling exhaustion and triumph wash over him in equal measure. "They're running." "All of them? Will they return?" Viroleth asked. Marcus consulted the probability streams flowing through his enhanced consciousness, seeing potential futures spreading out like branches of an infinite tree. "Eventually, but not for a long time, and not with the same confidence they had before. They'll need centuries to develop new approaches, new technologies, new strategies for fighting opponents who don't follow the rules. And by then, humanity will have had time to become even more impossibly stubborn." Marcus looked out at the stars, where human ships were already pursuing the retreating enemy, not to destroy them, but to ensure they understood exactly what they'd faced. "We'll have new ways to ignore physics, new applications for controlled chaos, and probably a few more species who've learned that the universe is more flexible than they thought." Virolith regarded him with something that might have been amusement. "Your species has just defeated the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known by refusing to acknowledge that it was supposed to be impossible." "Pretty much." Yeah, Marcus settled back into his chair, feeling the symbiont pulse with satisfaction, as it absorbed the lessons of humanity's first galactic war. Turns out the best way to fight an ancient enemy is to be too young and too stupid to know you can't win. In the aftermath of the battle, as human engineers began reverse engineering devourer technology and finding new ways to make it work better than its original designers had intended, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. He'd come to this forgotten station to die alone, expecting nothing more than quiet darkness at the end of a short life. Instead, he'd discovered that sometimes the most important thing isn't winning or losing, but simply refusing to give up. Humans had survived not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than their enemies, but because they were too stubborn to accept that survival was impossible. As Virolith prepared to return to her own people with news of humanity's victory, Marcus began planning his next project. The galaxy was full of impossible problems waiting for human solutions, and he had all the time in the universe to find them. After all, someone had to keep proving that the word impossible was just another challenge waiting to be solved.